My name is Amber Wiggins, and I am 34 years old. On paper, I am an Army Staff Sergeant, a disciplined professional dedicated to serving my country. But in the eyes of my family, I am nothing more than a walking ATM and a single, childless failure. My younger sister Maya's engagement party was supposed to be a celebration, a night of joy and new beginnings. Instead, it ended with me standing frozen in the middle of a crowded, upscale Ruth's Chris steakhouse, while Maya laughed and threw a glass of red wine all over my dress blues. She pointed a manicured finger at my face, right in front of her fiancé, a proud Army Ranger, and sneered, "Stop the act, Amber. You're just a secretary who types on a computer all day. Don't embarrass Eric with those fake medals you probably bought online." My mother sat right there, witnessing the humiliation, and didn't say a single word to defend me. She simply whispered, "Amber, go change. You're upsetting your sister." They thought I would bow my head and take it, just like I always do. But they didn't know that the man Maya was trying so desperately to impress, that arrogant Ranger fiancé, had just locked eyes on something pinned to my uniform. Something hidden beneath the wine stain that would make him snap to attention and call off this wedding immediately. Let me know in the comments what state you are watching from, and please hit that subscribe button if you have ever been looked down upon by your own flesh and blood. This story is the counterattack for every forgotten child who has carried the weight of the world in silence. But before that glass of wine shattered my patience, I have to tell you about the drive that led me straight into hell. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel of my beat-up Toyota Camry. The air conditioning was blasting, hitting the back of my neck with a chill that did absolutely nothing to soothe the pounding headache behind my eyes. 36 hours. That was how long I had been awake. I had just spent the last day and a half locked inside a windowless CIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility deep in the bowels of the Pentagon. I'd been analyzing terabytes of drone surveillance data, cross-referencing intel reports, and making split-second assessments to ensure a SEAL team didn't walk into a sophisticated ambush in Syria. My eyes burned as if someone had rubbed sand in them. My stomach churned, empty except for the acid of stale black coffee that had been my only fuel. I looked down at myself. I was still wearing my Army service uniform, the dress blues. I should have changed into civilian clothes hours ago. I should be wearing jeans and a t-shirt. But a red alert had come down the pipe at the last minute, forcing me to brief a 2-star general directly before I could even think about clocking out. By the time I was dismissed, I was too exhausted to find a bathroom and change. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to stand under a hot shower until the water turned cold and then sleep for 12 hours straight. But I couldn't. Tonight was Maya's night. It was always Maya's night. I lifted my head and put the car in gear, merging onto I-95. The traffic was a nightmare, gridlocked as far as the eye could see, which was typical for a Friday afternoon in D.C. The red taillights stretched out like a river of blood ahead of me. Suddenly, the silence of the car was shattered. My phone, connected to the Bluetooth, began to buzz violently. It wasn't a phone call. It was a barrage of text messages, arriving one after another like machine gun fire. Ding. 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 I glanced at the dashboard screen. From Mom. "Don't forget to stop by the bakery and pick up the cake. It's the one we ordered, the $200 custom one. Make sure they don't smear the icing." From Maya. "You better not be late, Amber. Eric hates people who run on civilian time. Don't embarrass me." Another one from Maya, seconds later. "Oh, and remember to transfer the deposit for the dinner to the restaurant ASAP. My card got declined again. Oops." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. 15 messages in the span of 2 minutes. Not a single one of them asked, "Hey, Amber, are you okay?" Not one of them asked, "Did you have a hard shift?" Or, "Did you get home safe?" To them, I wasn't a soldier who had just spent 36 hours ensuring national security. I wasn't a staff sergeant with a clearance level higher than most people even knew existed. I was just the pack mule. I was the mobile wallet, expected to dispense cash and favors on demand. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway, my hands shaking. The urge to just turn the car around was overwhelming. I could turn off my phone. I could drive back to my small, overpriced apartment in Alexandria, lock the door, and let them figure it out. I could let Maya's card stay declined. I could let them eat cake from a grocery store. But then, my father's voice echoed in my head, a recording that had been playing on a loop for 20 years. You're the big sister, Amber. You have to sacrifice. Maya is delicate. You're strong. It's your job to take care of her. That toxic mantra had been my prison cell since I was 14 years old. I thought about Jocko Willink, whose podcast I listened to religiously on my morning commutes. Discipline equals freedom. That was the code I lived by. Discipline kept me sharp when I was analyzing targets. Discipline kept me awake when everyone else was sleeping. But right now, my discipline felt less like freedom and more like a shackle. Don't blame, take ownership. That was another Jockoism. But who was I taking ownership for? My own life? Or the life of my 29-year-old sister who still lived like a teenager on her parents' dime? I let out a breath that shuddered in my chest. I grabbed my wallet from the passenger seat, pulled out my credit card, and punched the numbers into my phone to pay the Ruth's Chris invoice online. $3,000. Just like that. That was 2 months of rent for me. That was my entire savings from the last deployment bonus, gone in a single transaction to pay for steaks and wine I wouldn't even enjoy. Transaction approved, the screen flashed. I tossed the phone back onto the seat. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The dark circles under my eyes were visible even through the light layer of foundation I had applied in the Pentagon parking lot. I smoothed down the lapel of my jacket. I ran my thumb over the ribbons on my chest. The service ribbon, the marksman badge. And then, I touched the one that mattered most. The one partially hidden under the fold of my jacket so it wouldn't draw attention. The JSOC unit patch. Task Force. The world outside, the civilians in the cars crawling past me on I-95. And certainly my own family. They had no idea what the weight of these pieces of metal actually meant. To them, it was just a costume. Colorful jewelry. Maya called them my participation trophies. I put the car back in drive and pressed the gas pedal, forcing the old Camry back into the flow of traffic. I wasn't driving toward a sanctuary. I was driving toward a different kind of battlefield. There would be no IEDs, no insurgent chatter to monitor, no drone feeds to watch. But there would be words. And in my family, words were sharper than shrapnel. Ruth's Chris Steakhouse was waiting. And so was hell. I just hoped my armor was thick enough to survive the night. The notification on my phone screen glowed in the dim cabin of the car. Payment successful, $3,000. $3,000. Just like that. I stared at the number, but my mind didn't stay in the present. That number was a key, unlocking a door I usually kept bolted shut. It dragged me backward, through a timeline of receipts and invoices that marked my life not by years, but by how much I had cost myself to keep my family afloat. I remember being 18 years old. Most kids my age were worrying about prom dates or college applications. I was working 3 jobs. My mornings started at 5 a.m. under the fluorescent lights of McDonald's, flipping hash browns. In the afternoons, I restocked shelves at the public library, inhaling the dust of old books. And my nights? I spent them answering calls at an answering service center until my voice went hoarse. I saved every single dime. I didn't buy clothes. I didn't go to the movies. I ate the free shift meals at McDonald's so I could hoard my paycheck. It took me 6 months to scrape together $1,500. It felt like a fortune. With shaking hands, I bought a beat-up Ford Taurus from a neighbor. It had rust on the wheel wells and smelled like stale cigarettes, but to me, it was a chariot. It was my ticket out. It was freedom. But the day I drove it into our driveway, beaming with pride, my father didn't smile. He didn't say, "Good job, Amber. I'm proud of your hard work." He stood on the porch, arms crossed, and looked from the car to me. "Maya needs a way to get to her classes at the community college," he said, his voice devoid of negotiation. "You're strong, Amber. You can take the bus. The walk to the stop will be good exercise for you." Just like that, the keys were snatched from my hand before I had even put the car in park. My freedom was transferred to Maya, who hadn't worked a day in her life. 2 weeks later, the call came at midnight. Maya had driven the Taurus into a telephone pole after a party. She was drunk. She was fine, not a scratch on her. But my car, my $1,500 of sweat and grease, was totaled. A crumpled piece of metal in a tow yard. When I got home, my parents weren't yelling at Maya for driving under the influence. They weren't lecturing her about responsibility. They turned to me, their faces twisted in disappointment. "Why did you buy such an old piece of junk, Amber?" my mother asked, shaking her head. "The brakes were obviously bad. You could have killed your sister with that death trap." That was the first lesson I learned in the Wiggins household. My assets were community property, but Maya's mistakes were my liabilities. The memories shifted, darker now. I was no longer a teenager flipping burgers. I was a recruit in boot camp. My feet were covered in blisters that had burst and bled into my socks. The cold of the Missouri winter seeped into my bones during our night marches. I was exhausted, pushed to my physical and mental limits, screaming cadence until my throat bled. In those rare, precious moments of downtime, while other recruits were reading loving letters from home filled with encouragement and care packages of cookies, I would open my envelopes. They were from my mother. But there were no words of pride. There was no, "Stay strong, honey." There were only numbers. "The electric bill went up this month because of the heat wave," she wrote in her loopy cursive. "Maya needs braces. The orthodontist says it's urgent. Your father's back is acting up again. He can't work overtime." They didn't see my enlistment as service to the nation. They didn't see the uniform. They saw me as a migrant worker who had gone off to a foreign land solely to send remittances back to the village. I wasn't a soldier. I was a breathing ATM, programmed to dispense cash whenever they pushed the button of guilt. And then there was the career. My career. Maya loved to introduce me to her friends, and especially to her boyfriends, as my sister, the secretary. "Amber works for the army," she would say with a dismissive wave of her hand, sipping her mimosa. "She does filing and answers phones. You know, administrative stuff." She conveniently ignored the 6-month deployment to Afghanistan, where I lived in a tent and ate MREs. She ignored the time I disappeared for weeks on classified ops. She ignored the faint, jagged scars on my forearm from the time a window shattered next to me during an IED blast near our convoy. Why did she do it? Why did my parents let her? Because if they acknowledged that I was a warrior, if they admitted that the black sheep was actually a wolf protecting the herd, it would shatter Maya's narrative. She needed to be the golden child, the delicate princess who needed protecting. And a princess can't shine if her sister is a badass. So, they stripped me of my armor. They reduced me to paper and staples. "Don't talk about the guns and the bombs, Amber," my dad would whisper before family gatherings. "It upsets your mother. It scares Maya. Just say you work in an office. Keep the peace." Keep the peace. That was code for, "Let us lie about you so we feel better about ourselves." But the climax of this twisted tragedy happened just last month. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. My phone rang, jarring me out of a deep sleep. It was Maya. She was hysterical, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "They locked it, Amber. They locked the card," she screamed. "The venue needs the deposit by morning or they're giving our date to someone else. Eric will leave me. He'll leave me if I can't plan a simple wedding." "Do you want me to die alone? Is that what you want?" She wielded fear and guilt like a master swordsman. She knew exactly where to strike. And I, the fool, the trained soldier who could spot a terrorist threat from a drone feed but couldn't spot a manipulation right in front of my face, caved. I logged into my TSP, my thrift savings plan, my government retirement fund. I requested a hardship withdrawal. I took the tax penalty. I took the hit to my future. I transferred $10,000 to her account at 3 a.m. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she had cried, hanging up the moment the transfer cleared. The next morning, I scrolled through Instagram while drinking my bitter coffee. There was a new post from Maya, a picture of her and Eric, beaming, holding hands in front of the wedding venue. The caption read, "So blessed. We got the venue of our dreams. Thank you to the universe for always providing and listening to my manifestations." Blessed Destin's manifestation. Wedding vibes. The universe. Not Amber. Not her sister who had just gutted her retirement savings. The universe provided. I was just the invisible conduit, the ghost in the machine that made her manifestations appear. I sat there in my car on the side of I-95, the engine idling, looking at that payment successful screen again. The anger that had been simmering in my gut for years began to boil. It was a thick, hot sludge in my veins. They had taken my first car. They had taken my paycheck. They had taken my identity. And now they were taking my dignity. I swiped the notification away. If you are listening to this and you feel a tightness in your chest because this sounds too familiar, I need you to hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to type just one word: respect. Type respect if you believe that support goes both ways and that family shouldn't be a one-way street of taking. I put the car in gear. The memories faded, replaced by the harsh reality of the present. Ahead of me, through the windshield, the Ruth's Chris Steakhouse loomed like a fortress. And in the parking lot, standing under the warm glow of the entrance lights, I saw them, Maya and Eric, in the flesh. They were laughing. Maya was leaning into him, her hand on his chest, that expensive engagement ring, probably paid for by the universe, sparkling in the light. They looked like a magazine cover. They looked happy. And I looked like a wreck. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my uniform one last time. The ghost of the past was done haunting me. It was time to face the monsters of the present. I opened the car door and stepped out into the night. I watched them from the driver's seat of my Camry, the engine finally silent, but the heat of the drive still radiating off the hood. Maya and Eric. If you have ever seen an action movie, you know exactly what Eric looked like. He was the cliché come to life. He was a big guy, built like a linebacker, with sleeves of tattoos running down both arms. Even for a nice dinner at a steakhouse, he was wearing a tight tactical t-shirt with a Punisher skull on the chest, stretched to the limit over his biceps to make sure everyone within a 5-mile radius knew he worked out. Eric was an Army Ranger. I respected the tab. I respected the training. You don't get through Ranger school by being soft. But there is a difference between being a soldier and being a showboat. And Eric straddled that line aggressively. The problem wasn't his service. The problem was what he believed about mine. Because of Maya, Eric didn't see me as a fellow NCO. He didn't see me as a peer. In his mind, I was a sad, middle-aged woman who pushed papers in a temperature-controlled office in D.C., collecting a government paycheck while real men like him did the heavy lifting. He thought my salary was a waste of taxpayer money. He had no idea that just 6 months ago, the intelligence packet I built, the one that identified a high-value target safe house in Mosul, was the reason his platoon didn't walk into a fatal funnel. I had saved his life, or at least the lives of guys just like him. And he looked at me like I was the help. I rolled down my window just a crack. The night air let in the sound of their voices. They were standing near the valet stand, smoking. Maya ran her hand up Eric's arm, her voice taking on that sugary, helpless tone she used whenever she wanted something. "Babe, please promise you'll be nice to Amber tonight," she cooed, pouting her lips. "She's sensitive. You know how she gets. She's always been a little jealous because you're a real warfighter, and she's just, a civilian in a uniform." My grip on the door handle tightened until my fingers ached. A civilian in a uniform. Eric let out a bark of laughter, exhaling a cloud of smoke into the night air. "Don't worry, babe," he said, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "I won't bully the pog. Somebody's got to make the coffee and file the reports while the big boys are working, right? Pog. Person other than grunt." It was the favorite insult of the infantry, a way to dismiss anyone who didn't kick down doors for a living. To him, I was lower than dirt. I was support staff. I was unnecessary. The blood rushed to my face, hot and fast. Coffee? Filing reports? For a split second, the urge to slam the car door open and march over there was overpowering. I wanted to get right in his face. I wanted to scream at him about Operation Neptune's spear. I wanted to tell him about the nights I sat in a dark room, eyes glued to a drone feed, holding the power of life and death in my hand, deciding whether a shadow on a screen was a terrorist planting an IED or a farmer planting crops. I wanted to ask him if he had ever had to make a call that could wipe out a city block. But I froze. I didn't move. Why? Because of the security clearance. Because of the NDA I signed that was thicker than a Bible. And because of the discipline of a non-commissioned officer. General Mattis once said, "Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everybody you meet." That was the difference between me and Eric. He was loud, I was professional. A lion doesn't need to roar at a house cat to prove it's a predator. If I went over there and started a shouting match in the parking lot of a Ruth's Chris, I wouldn't be proving my worth. I would be proving Maya right. I would be the hysterical, jealous older sister. I took a deep breath, inhaling through my nose and exhaling slowly through my mouth, forcing my heart rate to slow down. 4 count in. 4 count hold. 4 count out. Tactical breathing. It worked in a firefight and it worked in a parking lot. I swallowed the lump of anger in my throat. It tasted bitter, like bile. I would play this game, but I would play it by my rules. I looked down at my chest. The streetlights caught the reflection of my ribbons. They weren't just colorful pieces of fabric. They were stories. They were sacrifices. I thought about Sergeant Davis. Davis had been my mentor during my first deployment. He was the one who taught me how to read the landscape, how to spot the disturbances in the dirt that signaled a buried bomb. He was the best soldier I ever knew. And he died 3 feet away from me when our vehicle hit a pressure plate I hadn't seen. He died so that people back home, people like Maya, people like my parents, could sleep safely in their beds. He died so Eric could stand there in his tight t-shirt and run his mouth. To let them turn this uniform into a joke, to let them reduce my service to making coffee, was an insult to Davis's memory. It was a desecration. I made a vow right then and there, sitting in the dark of my car. I swore on the ghost of Sergeant Davis that I would not let anyone disrespect this uniform tonight. Not my sister, not my parents, and certainly not some arrogant ranger who thought he owned the world. I opened the door. I stepped out, my boots hitting the pavement with a solid, heavy thud. I adjusted my beret, pulling it down just right over my eye. I straightened my jacket, ensuring the hidden patch was still concealed but present, a secret weapon waiting to be deployed. I wasn't walking into a dinner party. I was walking into enemy territory. And I was ready. The heavy wooden doors of Ruth's Chris Steakhouse swung open, and I stepped out of the humid DC night and into the air-conditioned luxury of the lobby. The air smelled of sizzling butter, prime-aged beef, and expensive perfume. Soft jazz played in the background, a stark contrast to the heavy metal drumming of my own heart. My parents were already there, standing near the hostess stand. My mother looked elegant. She was wearing a silk navy blue dress that fit her perfectly. It should have looked familiar to me, because I was the one who paid for it. Last month, she had sent me a link to the Macy's website with a text that said, "It would be so nice to have something decent to wear for Maya's big night." I had clicked buy now without a second thought. My father stood next to her, fiddling with his tie, looking uncomfortable in his suit. They looked like the perfect suburban couple waiting to greet their successful daughter. But when they turned and saw me, the smile slid off their faces like grease off a hot pan. My mother's eyes raked over my Army service uniform. She didn't see the crisp lines, the polished brass, or the ribbons that told the story of my career. She saw a costume. She saw an embarrassment. She didn't rush over to hug me. She didn't ask, "Amber, honey, you look exhausted. Are you okay?" Instead, she pursed her lips and let out a dramatic sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Amber," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for the hostess to hear. "I told you to change out of that stiff outfit. You look like a security guard who got lost on the way to the mall." A security guard. The insult landed with a dull thud in my chest. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to explain about the red alert, about the 36 hours I had just spent protecting the country she lived in, but my father stepped in before I could speak. He grabbed my elbow, his grip tight, and pulled me a few steps away from the entrance, towards a potted ficus tree. He leaned in close, his voice a harsh whisper. Listen to me, Amber, he hissed, the smell of his cologne overpowering. Tonight is important. Eric's family is very prestigious. They come from money. Don't you dare stand there with that sour look on your face. I'm just tired, Dad, I said, trying to pull my arm away. I haven't slept in. I don't care, he cut me off. And remember one thing. Eric is a ranger. He's a combat veteran. He has a big ego. Do not, and I mean do not, start debating military tactics with him. Don't correct him. Just play dumb, okay? Let him be the man. Make your sister happy for once. I stared at him, stunned. Play dumb? He was asking a staff sergeant, a senior intelligence analyst who briefed generals on national security threats, to pretend to be an idiot so that her sister's fiancé wouldn't feel threatened. He wanted me to dim my light so Eric's fragile ego could shine. Dad, I'm not going to lie about who I am, I said quietly. It's not lying, it's being polite, he snapped, releasing my arm. Now, put a smile on. They're seating us. We were led through the dining room to a semi-private area in the back. The table was set beautifully with crisp white linens and sparkling crystal glasses. Maya was already seated in the center, radiating triumph. She looked like a queen holding court. Eric was right next to her, his arm draped possessively over the back of her chair, looking every bit the conquering hero. My parents took the seats directly across from them, beaming with pride. And me? The hostess led me to the very end of the long rectangular table. My seat was on the corner, right next to the high-traffic aisle where the waiters were rushing back and forth with trays of sizzling steaks. Every time a server passed, I felt the wind of their movement. But the location wasn't the worst part. The worst part was who I was sitting across from. Directly opposite me sat an elderly woman with thick glasses and a hearing aid that was whistling faintly. It was Eric's great-aunt Mildred. She was smiling vaguely at a breadstick. The seating arrangement screamed the truth louder than any words could. I was the financier of this feast, the person whose credit card had just secured this reservation, but I was not a participant. I was the help. I was the outlier. I was essentially the guard dog stationed at the perimeter to ensure the royals enjoyed their meal in peace. I sat down, taking my beret off and placing it carefully on my lap, smoothing the wool fabric. I looked down the table. Maya was laughing at something Eric whispered in her ear. My mother was leaning in, rapt with attention. My father was pouring wine. They were a family. And I was just a guest they were forced to invite. Here, let me help you with that, sweetie. My mother's voice drifted down the table. I looked up to see my mother reaching over to Maya's plate. She picked up a knife and fork and began to cut Maya's filet mignon into bite-sized pieces. Be careful, my mother cooed. We don't want you to splash any juice on that beautiful dress. Eat slowly, okay? Maya, a 29-year-old woman about to get married, sat there and let our mother cut her meat like she was a toddler in a high chair. She smiled, basking in the attention. The sight made my stomach clench so hard I thought I might be sick. It wasn't just annoyance. It was a visceral, physical pain that ripped open a memory I'd tried to bury for 15 years. I was 19. I'd been training for the Army physical fitness test. I was doing pull-ups on a bar I'd rigged up in the garage. The bar snapped. I fell 8 feet onto the concrete floor. I heard the crack before I felt the pain. My left arm was broken, the bone pressing angrily against the skin. I had stumbled into the kitchen, cradling my arm, tears streaming down my face, white-hot agony shooting through my shoulder. Mom, I had gasped. I think I broke my arm. My mother had been on the phone with one of her friends. She didn't hang up. She covered the mouthpiece with her hand and looked at me with annoyance, not concern. Oh, Amber, honestly, she had sighed. You're always acting like such a tomboy, jumping around like a monkey. This is what happens when you act like a boy. Mom, it hurts, I had sobbed. I need to go to the ER. Well, I can't take you right now, she had said, uncovering the phone to resume her gossip. Maya has her dance recital in an hour and I have to do her hair. You're a big girl. You're tough. Take the bus to the hospital and don't get blood on the carpet. I had walked 4 blocks to the bus stop, cradling my broken arm, alone. And now, Here she was, 15 years later, terrified that a drop of steak juice might ruin Maya's dress, while the daughter she sent to the hospital alone sat ignored at the end of the table. There is a saying, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. My mother was the axe. She had swung and chopped at me so many times she probably didn't even remember the blows, but I was the tree. I bore every scar in the rings of my soul. I reached for my water glass. My hand was steady, soldier's discipline, but inside I was shaking. I took a long sip of ice water, trying to wash down the bitter taste of resentment that was rising in my throat. I didn't cry. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Crying was a luxury for people who had someone to comfort them. I had learned a long time ago that my tears were invisible to this family. I set the glass down. The condensation was cold against my fingertips. I took a breath. I was Amber Wiggins. I was a staff sergeant. I had survived war zones. I could survive a dinner. But as I looked up, I saw Eric leaning forward, a malicious glint in his eyes. He raised his wineglass, looking down the table directly at me. The silence was over. The attack was about to begin. The waiter arrived, placing a plate in front of me with a theatrical flourish. "Caution, madam," he warned. "The plate is 500 degrees." A thick ribeye steak sizzled violently in a pool of melted butter, the sound aggressive and loud, mirroring the boiling rage inside my chest. Around the table, everyone else was served. Expensive bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon were uncorked, the dark red liquid flowing into crystal glasses. Maya stood up, tapping her fork against her wineglass. Clink, clink, clink. The table quieted down. Maya smoothed her dress, making sure the light caught the massive diamond on her left hand, a diamond that I strongly suspected was purchased with the hardship withdrawal from my retirement fund. "I just want to say a few words," Maya began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Thank you all for coming tonight. It means the world to Eric and me." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes scanning the table before landing on me with a pitying smile. "And a special thank you to my big sister, Amber." My heart jumped a beat. For a split second, a foolish, childlike hope flared in my chest. Maybe she's going to acknowledge me. Maybe she's going to say thank you for the money. "Amber," she continued, "I know how hard it was for you to come here tonight. I know how busy you are with your office work, and I know how much you hate parties and being around people. So thank you for making the sacrifice to leave your little bubble for us." A ripple of polite, condescending laughter went around the table. The hope in my chest died instantly, strangled by her words. It wasn't a thank you. It was a backhanded compliment, a verbal slap disguised as a caress. In 3 sentences, she had managed to belittle my career as office work and paint me as an antisocial hermit who hated fun. I forced a tight, polite smile, gripping my napkin under the table until my knuckles turned white. "You're welcome, Maya," I murmured. Eric, emboldened by the laughter and perhaps the 2 scotches he'd had at the bar, leaned forward. His eyes were glassy, swimming with arrogance. "Yeah, Amber," he boomed, his voice carrying across the restaurant. "Maya tells me you work in HR or something? Personnel files? That must be thrilling." He chuckled, looking around the table to ensure he had an audience. His cousins and friends snickered. "It's intelligence analysis, actually," I said, my voice steady but quiet. Right, Intel. You guys stare at spreadsheets all day." Eric waved his hand dismissively. "Let me ask you a serious question, though. Since you're wearing the uniform and all, do you actually know how to shoot a gun? Or are you only qualified on the stapler?" The table erupted. "Watch out, Eric!" one of his groomsmen shouted from the other end of the table. "She might give you a nasty paper cut. That's a kill shot in the admin world." "Death by PowerPoint," another one yelled. They were howling now, wiping tears from their eyes. I sat there, frozen. The heat from my sizzling steak plate was nothing compared to the heat rising in my face. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the feeling of being stripped naked and whipped in the town square while the villagers cheered. I looked across the table at my parents. "Help me," my eyes pleaded. "Dad, you know the truth. You saw my qualification scores." "Mom, You drove me to karate practice for 6 years until I got my black belt. You know I can take care of myself. Tell them." My father met my gaze. For a second, I saw a flicker of discomfort. But then, he looked at Eric, the ranger, the son-in-law he had always wanted. And he made his choice. He laughed. "Oh, Eric, stop teasing her," my father said, raising his glass in a toast to Eric's father. "Amber is a lover, not a fighter. She's gentle. She doesn't know anything about guns or combat. She's book smart, you know? Good at school, bad at life." My mother nodded in agreement, sipping her wine. "Amber hates violence. She gets squeamish if she sees a spider." They denied me. Right there, in front of strangers, they erased my identity. They took the soldier, the marksman, the survivor, and they buried her under a pile of lies just to make Eric feel big. That denial hurt more than Eric's insults. Eric was just a bully. But my parents? They were traitors. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, terrifying click of a safety being disengaged. The ticking bomb that had been counting down inside me for 20 years finally hit zero. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. I moved with the slow, deliberate precision of a predator acquiring a target. I picked up my water glass and took a sip, letting the silence stretch out. The laughter at the table died down as they waited for me to look embarrassed or look away. Instead, I set the glass down and locked eyes with Eric. I didn't blink. I stared straight into his pupils, channeling every ounce of command presence I had earned over 15 years of service. "Actually, Eric," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a knife. It wasn't loud, but it was projected perfectly. "I don't work in HR, and regarding your question about shooting..." I leaned forward slightly, just enough to intrude on his personal space from across the table. My last qualification on the M4 carbine was 40 out of 40 on pop-up targets. Expert badge. And I shot a perfect score on the M9 pistol qualification last week. I tilted my head, keeping my eyes locked on his. "What was your last score, Eric? Did you hit 36, or did you have an off day?" The silence that fell over the table was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Eric's smile froze on his face. His eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected the secretary to know the metrics. He hadn't expected the book-smart girl to have a shooter's gaze. 40 out of 40 is a perfect score. It's rare, even for infantry, even for rangers on a bad day. It requires not just skill, but ice-cold nerves. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the whistling of Aunt Mildred's hearing aid. Then Maya gasped. She glared at me, her face flushing red with indignation. "Amber," she hissed, her voice vibrating with shock. "What are you doing? Why are you being so rude?" I sat back in my chair, picking up my fork and knife. My heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding my system like a drug. It was the same feeling I got right before a raid. The fear was gone. There was only clarity. "I'm just making conversation, Maya," I said calmly, cutting a piece of my steak. Eric asked a question. I answered it. I put the steak in my mouth and chewed. It tasted like victory. But as I looked at Maya, I saw her hands shaking. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was furious. I had broken the script. I had stepped out of my role as the punching bag. And the princess was about to strike back. Maya exploded. It wasn't a slow burn. It was an instantaneous, volcanic eruption triggered by the one thing a narcissist cannot handle: being upstaged. She stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor, a harsh screech that cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. Her face, usually so perfectly composed with layers of expensive makeup, was contorted into a mask of ugly, red fury. "Can you just stop?" she shrieked. Her voice wasn't just loud, it was piercing, echoing off the mahogany walls of the steakhouse. "You always do this. You always have to make everything about you." Conversations at nearby tables stopped. Heads turned. A waiter carrying a tray of martinis froze mid-step. We had become the show. We were the spectacle everyone pretends to ignore while desperately listening to every word. I'm not doing anything, Maya, I said, keeping my voice low and level. I remained seated, my back straight, my hands resting calmly on the table. It was the posture of someone de-escalating a hostile locale during a patrol. Sit down, you're making a scene. I don't care if I'm making a scene, she yelled, pointing a manicured finger at my face. You're just jealous. You're jealous because Eric is a real hero, a real man who fights for his country, and you're just nothing. You're a zero. You're a bitter old spinster in a Halloween costume trying to steal my spotlight. Zero. Halloween costume. The words were designed to hurt, to dig into the insecurities she thought I had. But they bounced off me. I had been called worse by Taliban insurgents. I looked at her calmly, almost pitying her lack of control. But my calmness was gasoline to her fire. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to scream back, to cry, to break down so she could be the victim again. And because I wasn't giving her that satisfaction, she decided to take it by force. Her hand shot out and grabbed her wine glass. It was full to the brim with expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, a deep, blood-red liquid. You like wearing that uniform so much? She sneered, her eyes manic. You think you're so special with your little medals? Let me decorate it for you. Time seemed to stop. In combat, they say time slows down during an ambush. Your brain processes information at hyperspeed, making seconds feel like minutes. That's exactly what happened now. I saw her arm tense. I saw the liquid slosh inside the glass. I saw the malicious intent in her eyes. I could have moved. I could have blocked it. My reflexes were faster than hers. I could have caught her wrist and snapped it before she even finished the motion. But I didn't. I sat there, unmoving as a statue. I let it happen. I needed everyone to see exactly who she was. Maya swung her arm. The wine left the glass in a perfect crimson arc. It hung in the air for a fraction of a second, shimmering under the warm lights of the chandelier, beautiful and destructive. Then, it hit me. Splash. The liquid slammed into my chest. It was cold, shockingly cold against the warmth of my skin. It soaked instantly into the dark blue fabric of my jacket. It splashed up onto my face, stinging my eyes. It dripped down onto the pristine white collar of my shirt, staining it a violent pink. It ran over my ribbons, over the marksman badge, over the service stripes, turning my career achievements into a sticky, dripping mess. The smell hit me next, the overpowering scent of alcohol and grapes. I sat there, blinking the wine out of my eyelashes. A single drop rolled down my nose and fell onto my hand. The restaurant was dead silent. The jazz music seemed to have stopped, or maybe my brain just tuned it out. No one moved, no one breathed. Even the kitchen staff had paused in the doorway. Maya stood there, panting slightly, the empty glass still clutched in her hand. For a second, she looked triumphant. A smirk played on her lips. But then, as the silence stretched on, dragging into an uncomfortable eternity, the smirk faltered. She looked around and realized that no one was cheering. Eric opened his mouth to laugh. I could see it in his face. He wanted to make a joke, to break the tension, to side with his fiancé. He let out a short, nervous, heh. But then I stood up. I pushed my chair back slowly. The sound was deliberate. I rose to my full height. Wine dripped from my chin. It dripped from my elbows. It pooled on the floor by my boots. I didn't wipe it off. I didn't try to clean myself. I just looked at them. I looked at Maya. Then I looked at Eric. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. In the military, we talk about command presence, the ability to project authority without speaking. But this was beyond that. This was killing intent. It was the cold, hard look of someone who has seen death and isn't afraid to deal it out. Eric's laugh died in his throat. He choked on it. His eyes darted from my face to the stain on my chest, and I saw something change in his expression. Fear. Genuine, primal fear. He recognized the look in my eyes. It was the look of a predator that had just been poked one too many times. I turned my gaze to my parents. This was it. This was the moment. My sister had just assaulted me in public. She had desecrated a United States Army uniform. Surely this was the line. Surely this was where my mother would stand up and slap her. Surely this was where my father would demand an apology. I waited. My mother looked at me. She looked at the wine dripping onto the expensive carpet. She looked at the faces of the other diners staring at us in horror. Then she reached out and tugged on my father's sleeve. She leaned in, not to comfort me, but to distance herself from the embarrassment I represented. "Amber," she hissed, her voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Go to the restroom and clean yourself up, or just leave. Look at what you've done. You've upset your sister. Why do you always have to cause so much drama?" The world tilted on its axis. I upset her? I caused the drama? The wine was cold, but those words were ice picks driven straight into my heart. The armor I'd built around myself for 20 years, the armor of, they love me in their own way, the armor of, family is everything, shattered. It fell to the floor along with the red wine. There was nothing left to protect. There was no misunderstanding. There was no tough love. They didn't see me as a daughter. They didn't see me as a human being. I was just an inconvenience. I was a prop in their play that had malfunctioned, and now they were mad that I was ruining the scene. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, for the first time in years. I didn't see the woman who raised me. I saw a stranger. A weak, selfish stranger. If you are feeling the rage boiling in your blood right now, if you want to reach through the screen and scream for justice, please hit that like button. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And in the comments, I want you to type, "No more." Type, "No more," if you agree that family ends where disrespect begins. I took a deep breath. The scent of wine was suffocating. I reached for a cloth napkin from the table and slowly, methodically, wiped the liquid from my face. "I'm leaving," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. I turned to walk away. But as I turned, the movement caused my wet jacket to pull tight against my body. The lapel, heavy with wine, flopped open. And for the first time that night, the hidden patch on my uniform was exposed to the light. Eric's eyes, wide with panic, dropped to my chest. He blinked, he squinted, and then his jaw dropped. He saw it. The game was over. I stood there, the wine drying sticky and cold on my skin, watching Eric's face. I had expected him to laugh. I had expected him to make another joke about death by PowerPoint. I was already calculating the quickest route to the exit, ready to leave this toxic wasteland behind forever. But Eric didn't laugh. He stood up. He didn't stand up like a drunk man at a bar. He stood up slowly, rigidly, his eyes locked onto my chest. Specifically, they were locked onto the small subdued patch that had been revealed when the wine weighed down my lapel. It was a patch most civilians wouldn't recognize. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have a screaming eagle or a lightning bolt. It was simple. But in the community of special operations, that simplicity screamed louder than any shout. It was the unit patch for the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, the task force. Eric blinked once, twice, as if trying to clear a hallucination. He took a step closer, ignoring Maya, who was tugging at his arm. The arrogance that had coated him all night like cheap cologne evaporated instantly. In its place was something else entirely. Recognition. And fear. He wasn't looking at me like a secretary anymore. He was looking at me the way a private looks at a minefield he just realized he was standing in. "That," Eric stammered, his finger pointing tremulously at my shoulder. "That's a task force patch. You're with the unit." His voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the restaurant, it carried. He looked up at my face, searching for confirmation. "You're a targeter. You're the ones who build the packages." Before I could answer, Maya jumped in. She let out a nervous, shrill laugh, sensing that she was losing control of the narrative. "Oh my God, Eric, stop it!" she cried, rolling her eyes. "What are you talking about? It's fake. She probably bought it on eBay or at a surplus store to look cool. She's just trying to trick you." Eric whipped his head around to face her. The movement was so violent, it made Maya flinch. "Shut up!" he roared. The entire restaurant gasped. My parents looked like they had been slapped. Maya froze, her mouth hanging open. This was her fiancé, her lapdog, her hero, and he had just barked at her like a drill sergeant. "You don't know what the hell you're talking about, Maya," Eric continued, his face flushed. "You don't buy these on eBay. This is a Tier 1 asset patch. Wearing this if you didn't earn it isn't just a lie, it's stolen valor. It's a federal crime. Nobody, and I mean nobody, would be stupid enough to wear that in a room full of military unless they were the real deal." He turned back to me, ignoring Maya's shocked whimpers. He swallowed hard. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was doing the math. The office work, the long hours, the vague descriptions of my job, the security clearance I couldn't talk about. It all clicked. He realized that while he was kicking down doors, I was the one telling him which doors to kick. He realized that the secretary he had been mocking all night was likely the reason he was still alive to mock anyone. He took a deep breath. And then, he did something that made my father drop his wine glass. Eric brought his heels together. Snap. The sound echoed on the wooden floor. He straightened his back, pulling his shoulders down, chest out. He assumed the position of attention. And then he raised his right hand to his brow. A crisp, perfect salute. "Staff Sergeant Wiggins," he said. His voice wasn't slurring anymore. It was crisp, respectful, terrified. "I apologize. I didn't know. I was out of line. I disrespected a superior NCO and a member of the task force. It won't happen again." The world seemed to tilt on its axis for my family. My mother was staring at Eric like he had grown a second head. My father was looking at me with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. And Maya? Maya looked like her entire reality was crumbling. The man she had paraded around as her trophy, her proof that she was better than me, was now standing at attention, saluting the failure sister. I let him hold the salute for a long moment. I let the silence stretch. I let everyone in that restaurant soak in the image of the big, tough ranger submitting to the woman covered in wine stains. Slowly, lazily, I raised my hand. I gave him the casual, slightly dismissive return salute of a seasoned NCO who has seen it all. "At ease, Ranger," I said calmly. "You're making a scene." Eric dropped his hand instantly, but he remained standing at attention. He looked sick. He looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. "I'm so sorry, Staff Sergeant," he whispered again. "I honestly thought... Maya told me..." He stopped. His eyes hardened. He turned slowly to look at Maya, who was now shrinking in her chair, clutching her napkin. "You told me she was a secretary," Eric said, his voice low and dangerous. "She is," Maya squeaked, tears welling up in her eyes. "She types, she files papers, it's the same thing." "It is not the same thing," Eric shouted. "She is an intelligence analyst for JSOC. Do you have any idea what that means? She hunts terrorists, Maya. She saves lives. She's probably done more for this country in one deployment than I have in my entire career." He looked at her with pure disgust. It wasn't just anger, it was revulsion. He looked at her like he had just realized she was rotting from the inside out. "You lied to me," he said, shaking his head. "You lied about everything. You made me disrespect a fellow soldier. You made me look like an idiot. You made me dishonor the uniform." "Eric, please," Maya sobbed, reaching for his hand. "It was just a joke. I just wanted you to be proud of me. I didn't want you to like her more than me." Eric pulled his hand away as if she were contagious. He looked down at the engagement ring sparkling on her finger, the ring bought with my retirement money. "Proud of you," he scoffed. "You're a liar, Maya, and you're a bully. I can't be with someone who treats their own family like this, and I definitely can't be with someone who disrespects the flag I fight for." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his car keys. "The wedding is off," he said flatly. Maya let out a scream that sounded like a wounded animal. "No, Eric, you can't. The venue, the guests, my life." "You should have thought about that before you threw wine on a staff sergeant," Eric said. He looked at me one last time, nodded respectfully, and then turned on his heel. He walked out of the restaurant without looking back. I stood there, feeling the adrenaline begin to fade, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. I looked at the wreckage of the dinner party. My mother was gasping for air. My father was pale. Maya was sobbing into the tablecloth. It was over. The lie was dead. And I was the last one standing. Chaos erupted the moment the front door swung shut behind Eric. It was like watching a dam break. Maya let out a wail that was part scream, part sob, and collapsed back into her chair, knocking over a half-full glass of water. She was hysterical, clawing at the tablecloth as if she could physically drag Eric back into the room by sheer force of will. "He's gone! He's really gone!" she shrieked, her makeup running in black streaks down her face. "You ruined it! You ruined everything!" My parents were in a state of total panic. My father was looking at the door, then at Maya, then at me, his face pale and sweating. He looked like a man who had just watched his retirement plan walk out on two legs. But it was my mother who moved first. She didn't rush to comfort her sobbing daughter. She rushed at me. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into the wet fabric of my uniform. Her eyes were wild, filled with a frantic, selfish desperation. "Amber," she hissed, shaking my arm. "What have you done? Are you insane? You just destroyed your sister's happiness. You chased him away. Run after him, right now. Run after him and tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him you're sorry." I looked down at her hand clutching my arm. Then I looked up at her face. For 34 years, I'd looked at this woman and seen authority. I'd seen the matriarch I needed to please. I had seen the gatekeeper of the love I so desperately craved. But now? Now, I looked at her, and I saw a stranger. I saw a small, petty woman who cared more about saving face in front of a wealthy family than she did about her own daughter's dignity. She didn't care that I was covered in wine. She didn't care that I had been insulted. She only cared that the boat had been rocked. "Let go of me," I said. My voice was quiet, but it had the weight of a tank. My mother flinched and pulled her hand back as if she had been burned. "Amber, please," my father stammered, stepping forward. "We can fix this. Just go apologize. Eric is a reasonable man. We can smooth this over." "Smooth it over?" I laughed, a short, dry sound. "There is no smoothing this over, Dad. The bridge is burned, and I'm the one who lit the match." I reached into the pocket of my sodden jacket and pulled out my wallet. My fingers brushed against the leather, finding the folded piece of paper I'd printed out earlier that day. It was the receipt for the online payment I had made in the car. $3,000. I pulled it out and smoothed it flat on the table, right next to Maya's sobbing face. "Here," I said. "I paid for the dinner. The wine, the steaks, the cake. It's all covered." My father blinked, confused. "What? Why are you giving me this?" "Consider it a parting gift," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "Or better yet, consider it funeral costs." "Funeral costs," he whispered. "Who died?" "This relationship," I said. "Us. Being a family. It's dead. I'm burying it right here, right now." The silence that followed was heavier than the silence after the wine throw. Maya stopped crying for a second, looking up at me with puffy eyes. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Amber, don't be dramatic," my mother scoffed, trying to regain her footing. "You're just upset. You'll calm down and we'll talk about this tomorrow." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "We won't. I'm not coming over for Christmas. I'm not coming for birthdays. I'm not answering your calls when the rent is due or when Maya needs a new purse. I'm done." I adjusted my beret, pulling it down tight. I squared my shoulders. "I'm going to find my own life," I told them. "A life where I'm not an ATM. A life where I'm not a punching bag. A life without you." "You can't just leave," Maya screamed, finding her voice again. "You owe me. You ruined my wedding." "I didn't ruin your wedding, Maya," I said, looking down at her one last time. "You did. You built a relationship on lies and it collapsed. That's on you. Jocko says, take ownership. Try it sometime." I turned my back on them. "Amber, come back here," my father shouted. "Amber!" I started walking. I walked past the staring diners. I walked past the stunned hostess. I walked towards the heavy wooden doors. Behind me, the sounds of my family, the weeping, the shouting, the blaming, began to fade. With every step I took, the noise grew fainter. It was like tuning a radio dial away from static and finding a clear signal. My boots felt lighter. My chest felt lighter. For 20 years, I'd been carrying a 50-pound rucksack filled with their expectations, their debts, and their emotional baggage. I had marched through mud and fire for them, thinking that if I just carried it long enough, they would love me. But now I had dropped the pack. I had cut the straps and let it fall. I pushed open the doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the night. The DC air hit me. It wasn't fresh. It smelled of exhaust fumes, wet asphalt, and the humidity of the Potomac. But to me, in that moment, it was the sweetest perfume I had ever smelled. It smelled of autonomy. It smelled of peace. It smelled of freedom. I walked to my car, the old Toyota Camry that had been my sanctuary and my prison. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My face was streaked with dried wine. My uniform was a mess. But my eyes were clear. The exhaustion was still there, but the despair was gone. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen lit up with notifications. 5 missed calls from Mom. 3 texts from Dad. A string of hateful messages from Maya. I didn't read them. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled to Mom. My thumb hovered over the name for a fraction of a second. A tiny instinctive part of me, the little girl who just wanted her mother to hug her when she broke her arm, hesitated. But then I remembered the look on her face when she told me to clean myself up because I was embarrassing her. I pressed the button. Block caller. I scrolled to Dad. Block caller. I scrolled to Maya. Block caller. The screen went dark. It was done. The cord was cut. There was no going back. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life, a steady, reliable hum. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, leaving the wreckage of the engagement party, and leaving the Wiggins family behind in the rearview mirror. I merged onto the highway, heading home. Not to the home where I was a daughter or a sister, but to the home where I was just Amber. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. 1 year later. They say karma has no deadline, but in the case of the Wiggins family, it arrived with the speed and efficiency of a drone strike. When I cut the cord, I didn't just stop sending money. I removed the structural support beam that had been holding up their entire house of cards. And without me there to shore up the foundation, the collapse was spectacular. It started with Maya. Without Eric's dual income and without my emergency transfers, her lifestyle of brunch mimosas and designer handbags hit a brick wall. Her landlord didn't care about her manifestations, he cared about the rent. After 3 months of missed payments, he evicted her. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that it was ugly. She had to sell everything. The Michael Kors bags went on Poshmark. The Chanel clutch I'd bought her for her birthday went to a pawn shop. She even had to sell the engagement ring. Eric hadn't even asked for it back. He was so disgusted he just wanted to wash his hands of her completely. But even that wasn't enough. At 30 years old, the golden child had to pack her remaining belongings into trash bags and move back into our parents' basement. It was the ultimate failure to launch. The princess was back in the tower, but this time there was no prince coming to rescue her, and the castle was crumbling. My parents didn't fare much better. For years, they had lived beyond their means, relying on my contributions to cover the gaps in their budget. They treated my bank account like an extension of their own. But when the well ran dry, reality hit hard. The argument started. My mother blamed my father for not making enough. My father blamed my mother for spending too much. The stress of having Maya back home, unemployed and miserable, turned their house into a war zone. Bills began to pile up on the kitchen counter. The electric company sent final notices. The property taxes they had ignored for 2 years finally caught up with them, threatening a lien on the house. They tried to call me, of course. For the first few months, my phone would light up with calls from unknown numbers or from Google Voice accounts they created to bypass my block. Voicemails filled up with a mix of guilt-tripping sobs and angry demands. Amber, pick up, We're family. Your sister needs help. How can you be so cruel? We raised you better than this. I never answered. I never listened past the first 3 seconds. I deleted them with the same detached professionalism I used to delete spam emails. They were finally experiencing the financial anxiety I'd carried for them for a decade. They were learning, the hard way, that the useless daughter was actually the only reason they hadn't drowned years ago. Meanwhile, my life was skyrocketing. It turns out when you aren't hemorrhaging thousands of dollars a month to support ungrateful relatives, you can build a pretty incredible life. 6 months after the incident at Ruth's Chris, I was promoted. I made Sergeant First Class, E7, below the zone, meaning I was promoted ahead of my peers. It was a huge achievement. My commanders cited my unwavering focus and leadership under pressure. They had no idea that my newfound focus came from finally cutting out the noise in my personal life. I used the money that used to go to Maya's credit card bills to invest in myself. I bought a condo in Alexandria. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Potomac River. Every morning, I drank my coffee. Good coffee, not the cheap stuff. Watching the sunrise over the water in a home that was quiet, clean, and paid for by my own hard work. I started taking care of myself. I joined a yoga studio. I started traveling on my leave days, not to visit family, but to see places I actually wanted to see. Paris, Tokyo, Rome. And I started dating. Real dating. I met Mark, an army surgeon, a major with kind eyes and a quiet strength. He didn't need me to shrink so he could feel big. He respected my rank, he respected my job, and most importantly, he respected me. When I told him about my family, he didn't tell me to forgive and forget. He held my hand and said, "You did the right thing." It was a Tuesday evening when the past and present finally collided. I was at Whole Foods, picking up ingredients for dinner. I was wearing my Lululemon leggings and a fitted gym tank, feeling strong after a good workout. I looked healthy. My skin was glowing. The dark circles under my eyes were gone. I pushed my cart towards the checkout lanes. The store was busy, lines stretching back into the aisles. I scanned for the shortest one. Lane 4. I steered my cart over and started unloading my groceries. Organic vegetables, a nice bottle of wine, fresh salmon. "Did you find everything okay today?" the cashier asked, her voice dull and robotic. I looked up to answer. And I froze. It was Maya. She was wearing a green apron that was slightly stained. Her hair, usually perfectly blow-dried, was pulled back in a messy, frizzy ponytail. She wasn't wearing any makeup. Her face looked pale and puffy. Lines of exhaustion etched around her mouth. She looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her. She was scanning a bag of kale, her eyes fixed on the scanner. She hadn't looked at me yet. Beep, beep. Then, she reached for the bottle of wine. Her hand paused. She must have recognized the watch on my wrist, a Tag Heuer I had bought myself as a promotion gift. Slowly, she lifted her head. Our eyes met. For a second, the noise of the grocery store faded away. I saw the shock register in her eyes. Then came the shame. Her face flushed a deep, blotchy crimson. She looked at me, strong, successful, happy. And then she looked down at her stained apron. Her lips parted. I could see her throat working, as if she wanted to say my name, as if she wanted to say, "Amber, help me." But she didn't. The shame was too heavy. She looked back down at the scanner, her hands trembling as she passed the wine bottle over the laser. Beep. I didn't say anything either. I didn't smirk. I didn't feel a surge of malicious glee. I just felt nothing. A profound, peaceful indifference. She wasn't my sister anymore. She was just a cashier having a bad day. I tapped my card on the reader. "Receipt in the bag," she mumbled, not making eye contact. "Thanks," I said. I took my bags. I walked away. I didn't look back. I walked out of the automatic doors into the crisp evening air, leaving Maya Wiggins in lane 4, trapped in the life she had built for herself. We were strangers now. and that was the happiest ending I could have asked for. 5 years later. The auditorium was filled with the murmur of voices and the rustle of uniforms. The air smelled of floor wax and anticipation. I stood on the stage, the bright lights warm on my face, feeling the weight of the moment settle onto my shoulders. "Attention to orders," the adjutant barked. The room snapped to silence. "The Secretary of the Army has reposed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, fidelity, and professional excellence of Sergeant First Class Amber Wiggins." I looked out into the crowd as the citation was read. In the front row, there were 3 empty seats. My parents weren't there. Maya wasn't there. 5 years ago, those empty seats would have been gaping wounds in my heart. They would have been proof of my unworthiness. But today, looking at them, I didn't feel pain. I felt peace, because the seats next to them weren't empty. Sitting in the front row, looking handsome in his dress uniform, was Mark, my husband. He was beaming, holding his phone up to record the moment, looking at me with such unadulterated pride that it made my chest tight. Next to him were my boys from the unit. Tough, bearded operators who hated wearing dress uniforms but had polished their boots and put on ties just for me. They were the ones who had checked on me when I was sick. They were the ones who had helped me move into my condo. They were the ones who knew my coffee order and my darkest fears. And sitting next to them, clapping harder than anyone, was Eric. Yes, Eric. After that night at Ruth's Chris, after he walked away from Maya, he reached out to me. Not to beg for forgiveness, but to earn it. He had grown up. He had deployed 3 more times. He had become a quiet professional. He wasn't my brother-in-law, but he had become my brother-in-arms. Promoted to the rank of Master Sergeant, Mark and Eric stepped onto the stage. With steady hands, they removed the old rank from my shoulders and pinned on the new ones. 3 chevrons up, 3 rockers down. Master Sergeant, the rank of a leader. The rank of someone who has mastered their craft. As the applause washed over me, I realized something profound. There is a saying that people often misuse: blood is thicker than water. But the original biblical meaning is quite different. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds you choose, the bonds forged in fire and shared values, are stronger than the accidents of birth. Looking at Mark, at Eric, at my team, I knew I had found my true family. Later that afternoon, back in my office, I found a letter waiting on my desk. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, though it was neater than I remembered. It was from Maya. I hesitated for a moment. The old instinct to protect myself flared up. But I was a master sergeant now. I didn't fear paper. I opened it. "Dear Amber," it began, "I saw the announcement about your promotion on the Army's Facebook page. Congratulations. You look strong. You look happy." I sat down, running my finger over the ink. "I'm not writing this to ask for anything." The letter continued. "I know I lost the right to ask you for help a long time ago. I just wanted you to know that you were right. About everything. After Eric left, and after you left, I hit rock bottom. Mom and Dad couldn't save me. I had to save myself. I went back to school, Amber. I'm graduating next month as a registered nurse. It's hard work. My feet hurt every day. But for the first time in my life, I feel useful. I feel like I'm actually doing something instead of just taking. I know I can't undo the past. I know I can't unthrow that wine. But I want you to know that I admire you. I always did. I was just too insecure to admit it. I hope you have a wonderful life. You deserve it. Love, Maya." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't reach for a pen to write back. I didn't pick up the phone to call her. Forgiveness, I had learned, doesn't always mean reconciliation. I forgave Maya. I truly did. I was glad she had found a purpose. I was glad she was standing on her own 2 feet. But that didn't mean I needed to invite her back into my life. Some bridges are burned not to keep people out, but to keep the toxicity from following you. I could wish her well from a distance while keeping my peace intact. That was the boundary I had set. And it was the boundary that kept me healthy. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the American flag was snapping briskly in the wind against a clear blue sky. I thought about the woman I was 5 years ago, exhausted, used, desperate for crumbs of affection from people who were incapable of feeding me. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had wasted trying to buy their love. I had saved Maya, in the end, but not by giving her money, not by fixing her problems. I saved her by letting her fall. I saved her by forcing her to face the consequences of her actions. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to say no. And more importantly, I had saved myself. I turned away from the window and looked at the reflection in the glass. I saw a woman who was whole, a woman who was respected, a woman who was free. If you are listening to this story right now and you feel a tightness in your chest because you see yourself in the Amber of 5 years ago, listen to me closely. If you are the one always giving, always fixing, always sacrificing while your family takes and takes and takes, stop. You are not an ATM. You are not a doormat. You are not a secondary character in someone else's movie. Your value is not measured by how useful you are to people who refuse to help themselves. Your worth is not a currency to be spent on their bad decisions. It will be hard. It will be terrifying. They will scream. They will cry. They will call you selfish. Let them. Put on your armor. Stand up straight. Shoulders back. Chin up. Walk out of that restaurant. Block those numbers. Drive away into the night. Because out there, in the world beyond the guilt and the manipulation, there are people waiting to love you. There are people waiting to respect you. There is a life waiting for you that is bigger, brighter, and more beautiful than you can imagine. I am Master Sergeant Amber Wiggins, and this is my final order to you. Live for yourself. This wasn't just my battle. It is a war many of us fight in silence every single day. Now, I have one final mission for you. If my story gave you the spark to finally draw your own line in the sand, I want to see you in the comments. Type freedom below to claim your new life. Don't let your story end in silence. Hit that like button to salute every black sheep who became a wolf and subscribe to this channel. We are building a new family here, one based on respect, not just blood. Dismissed.